This is the last session in the series, and we only have 3 items to run through. The first item is looking at off-server backups. Now, StatSeeker does allow local backups, but that's not the recommended option for obvious reasons. So let's have a quick look at the off-server options. Admin Tool, StatSeeker Administration, Backup and Restore. I'll drop into edit mode and we can see the backup options available. We're looking at FTP, Secure FTP and SSH. For SFTP and SSH, you will need to sort out sharing SSH certificates to enable the connection to the destination server. StatSeeker certs are configured and available for download from StatSeeker Administration section, Web Server Configuration. Let's have a quick look at FTP configuration. You can see that I have a configuration set up already, identifying the destination server and a path to the backup repository on that box. The cycle count is how many backups to keep before deleting the oldest, and we've got a backup schedule. Now, the backup process is run as the StatSeeker user. That's not the active user in the session. You can see I'm logged in as the admin user. The backup and restore processes are run as the StatSeeker user, a special server account that's automatically created during install, and the StatSeeker account runs a range of processes on your StatSeeker server. You can see for the FTP connection that I've specified the StatSeeker user and a password for that user on the destination server. And remember, you'll need to set permissions for that destination directory to allow that StatSeeker user to read, write and delete, or your backup will fail. If we have a look at SFTP or SSH, it's the same configuration, but when you attempt to save that configuration, you'll get some prompts around sharing of the SSH certificates, which you'll need to add to the authorized key on that destination server. There's another option outside of those available in the backup section in StatSeeker, and that's where StatSeeker is running as a VM and you're using a VM snapshot as the backup process. Be aware that you will need to shut down the StatSeeker server prior to creating a snapshot for backup purposes. Snapshotting a live StatSeeker server is just asking for data corruption. The VM host will report that the snapshot is created and everything is okay, but you may well be in for disappointment in the event that you actually need to try and restore from a live snapshot. Okay, the next option is dashboarding, and we're looking at image map links. I have an image map set up here and we're linking out from some of the nodes on this panel. There are a few configuration options available for those links. So if I click this London router node here, I'm sent off to the default device overview dashboard, and it's passing the device name to the device variable here. So when the dashboard loads, we're looking at data for our selected node. Let's have a look at the configuration for that link. Back in the image map edit mode and off to the image map tab. In the node configuration for the London router node, we can see the drill down specified here. The type defaults to disabled, but I've set it to point to a dashboard. And that will then give me a list of dashboards to select from, and all the dashboards that I've got visibility to are available in the list. Now, to set the device variable in the destination, there are a couple of options. If I had a variable in this image map panel with the same name as the variable that I want to set in the destination dashboard, then I can simply select include variables and it will pass the values along. But the variables in both dashboards must have the same name for that to work. Now, in my image map panel, there aren't any variables, so instead I'm going to use the URL parameters field here to achieve the same thing. The syntax for this is var dash and then the variable name equals and the value that I want to pass through to that variable. You can see that I'm just using a reference here. Now, I could simply add the value, and in this case, it would be London router. But when I built this image map, I configured a single ping state node, including the drill down, all the rest of the configurations, and then just duplicated the node configuration, updating the entity as I went, and that sped up the process of fleshing out my image map. Now, the syntax for this dynamic reference that I'm using is available on the mouse over, and we can see 2 options here. The second option of value would return the node value, and this is a ping state node, so it would simply be passing through the ping state, either up or down. So the option I need is the node label. The label will reference the value in the name field, and if it's blank like we've got here, it'll fall back to the entity field. So with this, we have a parameter of var device equals London router. Now, I've also used that same reference in the tooltip, so when you mouse over the node, it tells you exactly where you're going, the London Router overview. Now, for my CPU nodes, I have a different type of configuration. Clicking on that node, you can see we're sent off to a report. So let's have a look. To run a report, I set the type to absolute and just drop in the report URL. To get that URL back in the console, I select my device, London Router, set my time filter to the last 2 hours, and run the CPU loads report. Rather than this report, I'm using the drill down here to load another report, and then I'm going to copy the URL, dropping that back into my ImageMap link configuration. Now, the last configuration that I want to look at is one that I'm using for these remote offices. You can see I've links out to the Paris, Berlin, and Helsinki offices. With these, I'm linking out to the default network overview and setting the group variable to a group specific for the location. In the config, we can see again that I've set the type to dashboard, and I'm explicitly setting the group variable that I want to set in that destination. Now back in the panel, you can see that I have at least one device down in the Paris office. So hitting Paris, we head off to the network overview, and I can see details for that office and the devices which are currently offline. There are a couple of alternate link configuration options available in other panel types, and all of these link options are detailed in the documentation, and there's also a short 5 or 6 minute video which runs through them. The last item is SLA configuration and reporting. StatSeeker currently looks at a couple of types of SLA. If I head to the console and filter to SLA, we can see that there are Cisco IP SLA reports. So if your hardware supports it and you've configured it on those devices, then StatSeeker will pull in that data and populate these reports. And the other type being our StatSeeker device and interface availability SLA reports. And it's these guys that we're going to look at today, because to populate these reports, we need to configure an SLA within StatSeeker. If I run one of these reports without an SLA configuration, I just get an empty report. So, admin tool, user profile and grouping, add and edit SLAs. I'll add an SLA. I'll just name it business hours and set my availability target to 97.5. So this is just basic reachability from the StatSeeker server to the device. I'll set my business hours as Monday to Friday, 6:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. and save the SLA. Now that I have an SLA, I need to associate that SLA with the devices that I want monitored for adherence to that SLA. Off to add and edit groups. I can select a group or multiple groups of devices, and then from my entities list, select SLA and add the SLA to those groups. Back in the console, I'm going to run that report again, and we see our SLA. You might have multiple SLAs configured, and each group that is associated with that SLA and their availability stats. The total being the 24 hours a day value, and the SLA value being availability just for the hours that we defined within our SLA. For the interface availability, if you assign a group of devices, then it will apply the SLA to every interface on the device. You can, of course, create just a group of interfaces, such as my WAN links group, and apply the SLA to just those interfaces. This is probably a more common configuration. And that's everything that I wanted to cover in this session. Thanks for your time.